All right. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for the Alt Text as Poetry workshop as part of the Jersey City JCADA30 Festival. So my name is Bojana Cochliot. I'm a disabled artist and activist. I'm a white woman with short brown hair. It's a bob. It's about chin length. It's brown hair. I'm wearing a bright pink lipstick. The name of it is actually called Breathing Fire. And I have a chunky white kind of vintagey necklace on and a dress which has a little bit like a black and white pattern. So I'm just gonna start with an access check. I wanna make sure everybody's comfy, that everybody has what they need. We have two sign language interpreters today here, Kathleen and Stephanie. So if you need any additional help or have any questions, please reach out in the chat and we'll have somebody help you with that. I myself live with low vision, so I won't be able to access the chat, so I have some help today. Mike DeFeo, who's also my husband, is going to be helping with the chat and some of the access portions of this presentation. Also, I want everybody to feel comfortable. If you need to at any time to use the bathroom or take a phone call, if you are tired and need to lay down, I don't want this to feel super school-like. I want this to feel more like a relaxed kind of conversation where we're practicing together about alt text. I like to remember something a friend of mine, Kevin Gotkin, says. He says, feel free to disregard social etiquette in the name of access. So, please feel free to do what feels comfortable for you during the workshop. And just to give you an idea of what the plan is for today, I'm going to go over just some of the things in the workshop so we all have an idea, we're all on the same wavelength. I'm just going to talk a little bit first about the project, how it came to be, who I collaborated with to make it happen. I'm going to talk about what alt text actually is and get into that a little bit. Also talk about, what do I mean by alt text as poetry? We'll talk a little bit about that, unpack that a little bit. And I'll give you some examples so it kind of can be a little bit more concrete as to what I'm talking about. And then we're going to do a couple of exercises, 2 exercises actually, and I'll explain that more when we get to them. And I also want to emphasize that everything is optional. Again, like I said, I don't want this to feel, sometimes, workshops can feel a little school-like or like you're in the classroom, but I really want this to feel like a session where we get to kind of practice together and ask questions. So please, feel free if you have any questions during the workshop, you can feel free to ask it in the chat and, we'll answer that question. If at any time you feel like I might be talking too fast, please let me know. If you're having any trouble hearing what I'm saying or you need me to speak up, please let me know. Or any other things like that, please, feel free to reach out in the chat about that. And we'll also be dropping some resources in the chat. And if you have any resources that you want to add to the chat, please definitely feel free to do that. So I'm just going to start talking about this project. This project started when me and Shannon Finnegan, who's also a disabled artist and activist, we met at some other kind of access event. I think it was an event about disability nightlife, about making nightlife more accessible for people living with disabilities. And we both were working on access in a more creative way. So often access feels so compliance-based, like these rules or a checklist the government is giving you in order to make things accessible. But we were really both more interested in how we could use access in a creative way. Like, how could we use it in our art? Like, how could we use it, in the ways we were helping people learn about disability and access. And so we started to come up with this alt text as poetry workshop. And so we've been collaborating together ever since. It's been a couple of years now, and the alt text as poetry workshop has gone in, a couple of different directions and different iterations. So this workshop, or this idea of access as something more creative, is not something me and Shannon created on our own. There's an ecosystem. Artists and disabled artists and activists have been looking for this kind of creative access for a long time, and we are just like building on it. We're benefiting from their experiences and the work that they've done. And some of the artists that, and activists that have contributed to this are here on this list. I'll just name a few for now. Artists like Alice Shepard, Justin Allen, Aslan Thomas, Carmen Papalia, Georgina Klieg, Kayla Hamilton. These are just a snippet of the different artists and activists who've been working on alt text. So I definitely wanted to acknowledge the work that they had put into creative modes of access. That's not really a new thing, but it has been in existence for a while. And I wanted to definitely spotlight that way of thinking today in honor of celebration of the 30th anniversary of the ADA. So I'm also, now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what alt text is, so we can all kind of be on the same wavelength of understanding what alt text is. It's a type of image description. So usually it's used to help somebody who's blind or living with low vision access an image, access an image in a way that's either verbal or written. And so, a really simple definition of what alt text is, it's just a textual alternative to an image. And that can either be a photo or a GIF, anything that's visual. And alt text specifically is something used online. So it's going to be something on a website or on social media. The next thing I want to talk about in regards to alt text is just how it's used. Usually with alt text, it's somebody who uses a screen reader is going to be the person who's accessing alt text. Like for instance, I use a screen reader. I mostly use my iPhone to access everything. So when I touch my finger to the screen, it's going to read wherever I touch my finger. There's certain options where I can read everything on a page, and most likely if I'm swiping down my phone, it will start to read the top part, like the heading, title. It might read a couple paragraphs, and then it's going to get to a photo, right, or some kind of image. And so my screen reader is trying to access this photo. It's trying to like understand what this code is. And sometimes for me, when I'm scrolling through something, you get to the image, it'll be like, it starts at 1,565,75,000,000, it'll just like give me this like long line of numbers, or maybe it will say one face, two face. So it's not telling me what's in that image. But when you utilize alt text, and alt text is the code that's actually used to kind of translate the image. So if that alt text is there and my screen reader is looking for that alt text, it will find it, and then it will kind of almost translate that visual into something that's textual. So somebody who's blind or living with low vision knows what that is. And you can imagine like that really opens up so much of the internet to somebody who's blind or living with low vision, especially, Instagram is it's such a huge way of organizing events, and a lot of people who are blind or living with low vision use Instagram. So even just using alt text on Instagram is a way of creating more belonging for people who are blind or living with low vision, making them feel more like they're a part of that kind of digital community. And it's something that me and Shannon had really focused on, and that's one of our goals also is in this project, like creating more of a sense of belonging in like a digital community. There's also a couple of different questions you might want to keep in mind when thinking about alt text. And Mike, if you could read those questions.
Sure, and those are where?
So that's going to be in the PowerPoint. It will be after the WebAIM definitions. So there's like 3 questions, like why.
Oh, okay. Why is this non-text content here? What information is it presenting? What purpose does it fulfill?
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to make sure we had those questions clearly read out, because those are important things to keep in the back of your mind when you're creating alt text. We're not creating alt text just for the sake of creating alt text, and you might, and also you want to think more about the images that you are putting onto your website, being more conscientious of the images that you have there. So these are just some of the questions that I think are important to keep in mind while writing alt text. And then also just want to talk a little bit more about alt text in you, how alt text affects you in or can affect you in your everyday life. And I touched on it a little bit before. Most social media platforms right now have a pretty easy way to access an alt text option. Like Twitter they've made it really easy nowadays to add alt text to any tweet that you might be sending out. I'm not going to necessarily talk about the mechanics behind it, but just more like kind of going over like what social media websites are doing and how you can maybe utilize them. Facebook has an alt text option as well. It's still a little clunky. It doesn't work perfectly, at least in my experience, but it is an option that you can use. I also add captions. So when I'm captioning a photo, I make sure I also add an image description, because that can also help somebody who's blind or living with low vision access that. Instagram has, I think in 2018 in December, they have implemented in their advanced settings, if you go there is, you go to accessibility and you can just add the alt text there. It's really easy to do as well. And so that's just like some of the different social media platforms that utilize alt text. And again, just by doing that, you're creating more of a sense of digital belonging for everybody on the internet. And sometimes I think we feel like, how much can we actually do, in regards to alt text or access online, but even thinking about your own websites, using the alt text or image description on your own websites, or when you're using this on social media, it's really modeling a best practice. And it starts to get other people thinking about alt text as well. And for somebody who's using a screen reader, it also creates this, I think for me, I see somebody who's using alt text as an ally, somebody who is really diligently thinking of access. So on your own websites, if you're using Wix or Squarespace, it's not always like the clearest, like how to access the alt text options, but they do exist, it is there. And by doing that, that also, again, that shows that you're somebody who's dedicated to access in the virtual realm. And even if you're a volunteer or an intern or wherever you're working, even questioning the person who, either a supervisor or the person who runs marketing or the social media department, asking them what the access is like online for your particular job or internship or volunteer opportunity. Like maybe you won't necessarily that won't make them change things right away. It could possibly get them thinking about it and thinking more about access in that way. We don't always have agency over these things, but we can start to open up conversations about it. And alt text is not something that's necessarily obvious to somebody who isn't using a screen reader, right? Because it's only going to be for somebody who's using a screen reader that it will be read out to them. But a best practice with alt text is to, for people who use screen readers, is to use alt text, but then to also add like an additional image description in the caption. Because there's some people who are living with low vision who might not be using a screen reader. Sometimes, people who are of a certain age or people who haven't yet started to use a screen reader, having that image description there can really be helpful for them understanding what's happening in the image. So I just want to stop for a second and pause and just see if anybody has any questions so far about alt text or screen readers or anything regarding alt text so far. Do we have any questions in the chat?
No.
Good. Okay, great. So now, we've got a little bit of a better hold on what alt text actually is. I'm going to start and just talk a little bit more about the poetry portion of it. I want to say, before we begin talking about poetry, I'm not expecting anybody to write poetry today in the workshop necessarily. Of course, you're free to do that if you want to. But we're really just borrowing from poetry. We're just going to borrow from some of the elements of poetry. And, again, like when me and Shannon first started thinking about this project, we really were interested in borrowing from this huge well of information and words and language that already existed with poetry. Being able to borrow from that automatically kind of lent alt text maybe a little bit more familiarity. It kind of helped us create a little bit of a collective toolkit in writing alt text. So we're really just kind of borrowing from some of the elements of poetry in order to help alt text not feel so government mandated or compliance based, right? Because I think about alt text or image description as another creative layer I'm adding, especially like when I'm posting like my own artwork, being able to find like some of the right adjectives and words to describe one of my pieces of art, I think can add to the experience of viewing it online. So those are some of the things that were really, me and Shannon had in mind when we were thinking of borrowing from poetry. So one of the things in poetry that we wanted to think about was attention to language, really thinking about what words are we choosing. Like in poetry, when you're deciding to write a poem, I think there's a real attention to what exact words are going to be used, like what intention are behind the words that you're using, like what kind of perception are you trying to create, what are you trying to denote, what tone are you trying to set, what are you trying to make people feel. So really paying attention to the language and is something I think especially I focus on when I'm thinking about text, really trying to use my words more carefully. And trying to get out of, the words I use on an everyday basis. I try to change it up a little bit more. Second thing is word economy. So really, I think sometimes in poetry, or even in alt text, there can be times for long, lavish kind of descriptions and really detailed kind of descriptions of something, but partly in some poetry, we can think more about like the efficiency and like what words have a real impact, right? Especially when you're thinking about alt text. Alt text is usually about like 1 to 3 sentences. We were trying to just give people a taste of what the image is, like trying to give them an idea of what is going on in the image. And so I think that's one thing I think about too when we're borrowing from poetry in alt text is like what words have the most impact, like, and also the way the order in which you choose your words. Those are some of the things that I also I think about when I think about word economy. And last is kind of an experimental approach. So I think, more so than, let's say, writing potentially an essay or a letter to someone, poetry kind of allows us to play around more with words, to experiment a little bit more. And again, I think it kind of helps get away from more of a compliance-based mindset. And I think of it as adding a creative layer to your social media post, being able to kind of experiment with how you are writing about an image, playfulness with words, different word orders that might, express more what's going on in the image. And so, and I think it lends itself a little bit more to creativity to think of it that way. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about as far as borrowing from poetry in alt text. And I like to also think about an experimental approach also as far as in access. So when we're thinking about how we can make things more accessible, I'm, not just talking about only, adding things on after the fact, but also how are we making things accessible more intrinsically? Like, for instance, there is a play, I can't remember the name right now, but the playwright is writing in a chorus for the play. And the chorus is going to be describing what's happening within the play as a kind of method of access, because it's going to act as somebody who's describing the action to people who are blind or living with low vision, but they're written into the play as a way to describe the action. And so instead of having this like an additional person who is going to be describing the action, maybe in the audience, or who is reading it to somebody or speaking it to somebody who can't see, is built into this creative process of the play. And so I'm really interested in kind of trying to do something more like that within Jersey City and New Jersey, starting to kind of break out of like a compliance-based approach to access. So any questions so far? I know like the poetry part, I think people had some questions regarding previously, and I just want to take a minute to see if anybody has any questions now just about the poetry part of alt text. Anything in the, anything?
I'm not seeing no questions.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. And please just let me know. So now I know I've been talking a lot.
Bill Rude wrote an alt text poem.
Oh, did he? Okay. Well, later on, maybe we'll have time. We can read Bill's alt text poem. That would be great. I would love that. So I know I've been talking a lot about alt text and then alt text as poetry and how this project got started, but I'm gonna give us some examples now just so we can have like a little bit more of a clear idea of what alt text is and how it's used. And Mike, do you have those examples ready? Those in the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. So I think, let's see, this first one should be MCA Chicago. Is that correct?
MCA.
Maybe Death Valley?
Oh, yeah. So exercise 1 is the JC mural.
Right, but there's a section that says examples.
There's like the Facebook and Twitter stuff.
Okay, but there's no examples.
That was the stuff I deleted. Yeah, there's the Death Valley, MCA Chicago. Okay, great. I can share it.
Great. Yeah. So that's.
Please screen share.
So is it the description of the alt text?
Yeah, it's the alt text and the caption. It's the alt text itself. It's not the visuals.
Right. No, that's fine. And so there's the one for Death Valley, and then is it MCA Chicago?
Death Valley, MCA Chicago,
and Madison. Yeah, perfect. Great. So read that first one, the Death Valley one.
Should I share the slide or just read it?
No, you could just read it. It's fine. I mean, you could, yeah.
Okay, so an example of alt text would be, this is from at Death Valley National Park Service. So the alt text says, twisted wood branches in the foreground with an arc of stars in the sky above a dark distant mountain. So they're being real poetic there with their alt text. And the caption reads, visiting Death Valley this summer to view the spectacular night sky. Remember, moonlight will reduce the number of stars you can see, so plan your visit during a new moon. Download our summer visitor guide from the link in our bio for more night sky viewing tips and a night sky almanac.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
I like your off-the-cuff comment there. Yes, yes, they are being real poetic there. So that's the first example, and I really do appreciate this example because it really does put this image in your mind's eye, this arc of stars, twisted branches reaching towards the sky, and somebody could have simply wrote, nighttime, some stars in the sky, a tree, right? Like that would, you know, sometimes we think of what is an objective way to describe something. And somebody could have potentially just written that, but they tended to really, you know, use some of those elements from poetry to really create a picture in the mind's eye. And unfortunately, whoever was writing these really creative alt text descriptions is no longer there. It's kind of gone back to a little bit more of a simpler description. So this person's gone off to greener pastures to like describe someplace else. But I wanted to also show this example because we read two things there, right? So there was the alt text, which was that more creative part of it. And then Mike also read the caption part of it. And something to keep in mind when you're writing alt text is you don't want the alt text to double or repeat what's in the caption. You want to the alt text should have different information than what's in the caption. So the caption was, you know, giving you some more information about like what was going on at Death Valley National Park. And the alt text was just the description, right? It was just, it's almost like it's translating the visual into something that's textual for people who aren't able to see that. So you can even think about it as a translation in that way. So we have our second example is from the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And they're really, actually, it's one of the only large scale museums that are committed to like sustainably describing all of their images online. So Mike, if you could read that one too, that would be great.
Sure. The alt text, a lopsided man who appears inebriated sits jauntily in a chair. One of his hands holds a cigar while the other rests on the curvaceous butt of a nearby woman who stands painting at an easel. The caption reads, Jessica Campbell, The Brutal Telling, 2018. Acrylic rug on panel, 36 by 48 inches. Photo, James Prince, courtesy of Western Exhibitions.
Great, thank you. So in that example, definitely there were some interesting word choices like jauntily, curvaceous. These words are definitely a little different than what was used, I think, in the first one. And potentially it's a great example of creative alt text. And just like, again, I think thinking back to what I was saying about word choice, the word choice I think really helped evoke a certain sense of what was going on in the image. And the last image example, or the last alt text example that we have is from a friend of Shannon and I's, Madison Zalapani. And it's from her Instagram, if you could read that one.
Sure. The alt text reads, a screenshot of me being very impressed by my nephew Harry's new hat. The hat is a plastic green roof taken from a doll's house. And there's no caption.
Great, thank you. So I love this this alt text because you know, sometimes it can be tricky to be humorous in alt text and to also be efficient, right? But Madison did such a great job of doing this, and she did it by, I think, by the order by which she described, you know, so she was just talking about being very impressed by her nephew's new hat, and then later on you find out the new hat is the top of a doll's house. So you know, I think these are the three different examples that show you all the different ways alt text can be used, like either creatively, you know, through word choice, or through, I think, even the way you can kind of tie certain words and phrases together, or even by the order by which you're choosing to describe what's in the image and kind of creating something that's humorous. Because, you know, being creative and access doesn't mean that you have to be serious, that there is absolutely room, you know, for humor. But again, like sometimes it can be a little tricky, just you know, to be able to also convey the information that's there. And I also want to make a point just to say that when we're talking about experimentation in using alt text, again, it's not experimentation just for the sake of experimentation's sake, like using alt text to write secret images, you know, to people, you know, or using it in ways that's not meant for access. We are really specifically talking about making sure that alt text is used specifically for access, just because in so many places in the built environment and online, people living with low vision or who are blind don't have access, regular access to these kinds of things. So again, I just want to, experimentation is important, and I think a great part of this workshop, but it's also really experimentation for the sake of access. So I just want to make sure before I went on, I kind of just talked about that a little bit. So any questions for, like, we're almost, I'm almost done explaining things. I think we went over a lot. We, went over alt text and poetry and examples. Just want to pause a second and see if there's any questions. Yeah.
I had a quick question. Are there any, because even like as a person who is sighted, are there any like ableist words that we should watch out for in terms of, so it seems like saying image or imagery, like I was even wondering, like, is the word imagery potentially ableist? Like, are there any words that either we should, use or avoid in terms of dealing with people with low vision or blindness?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with a lot of the advocacy and activism, especially surrounding people who are blind or living with low vision. And imagery has not been a word that has been in contention. I think it's more two things. Like, when people use, and I'll just say this because I think it's important, when some people use disability as a metaphor, like, she was blind to the fact that the grocery store was closed, or she was blind to the fact how much I loved her, like that, using like the disability as like this negative metaphor, that's definitely offensive. I think maybe not to every blind person, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. For me, when I am in a space specifically talking about access and somebody keeps telling me, see this, see that, see this, see that, really frustrates me. It's kind of like, I'm here in this space, I don't necessarily see that. And I think that there's better ways to say, to bring attention to something, like to say, in this slide, there is this, instead of using the word see. And again, not all blind people or people living with low vision are going to have that same kind of reaction. I think maybe it's a best practice also just to always listen to what disabled people have to say about those things. I know that I have, more in the past couple of years, I have veered away from the term visually impaired. So I say, living with low vision, but it's not like a great offense to me if somebody says visually impaired, because it is so prevalent, and it's not all disability rights organizations agree that it might be something potentially problematic, but I would say just veering away from the word impaired in general when referring to somebody. I hope that kind of helps answer a little bit.
Yes.
And Mike, you said there were some comments?
Yeah, Summer had said that it was so interesting, and it reminds her of how many musicals do spell out the action in the songs, and it's possible to mostly enjoy the entire plot of something just by listening to the soundtrack.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I hope everybody heard that. The comment is in the chat, and Mike is just reading from the chat for me, so I have access to it all, but it's there. It's a comment by Summer, and just talking about how musicals often spell out things within it, and you might be able to understand all the action of what's going on just by listening to the musical. And that kind of makes me think about other types of image description, like audio description. For instance, like if your play like Hamilton is audio described, and it will, somebody will be there to kind of describe what's going on live in what's going on in the action. But I think there's also creative ways to weave that in so it doesn't have to be an add-on. Is there another comment?
Yeah, Richard, who's with us in the Zoom, says, I really like the idea of how the combination of a visual, text, ASL interpretation, and audio can create a multi-dimensional art piece that could be richer for people of all abilities.
Absolutely.
This is a great example of how a combination can be enhanced.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, when we're talking about multimedia art events and art experiences, I think that when you bring disability in, when you bring in those other minds and those other ways of thinking, like, you want to talk about people who are innovating and adapting and who are resourceful and create. I mean, that's what you have to be a lot of times as a disabled person in an ableist world. You're constantly working around limited resources. You constantly have to be creative and thinking of other ways to make things accessible for yourself. And I think that translates really well into art. Yeah, thank you, Richard, for that comment. I think that speaks to a lot of kind of the point of this workshop. So I think right now we're going to start with just describing the exercises and kind of just the intent of the exercises, right? Like, I just want to say everything is optional. I would, be happy if you did the exercises along with us, but it's, totally optional. We're here to just practice together, kind of, sort this stuff out, ask questions, learn a little bit more about alt text. So I just want to kind of put that out there before we begin. This is really just a practice session, and these exercises, there's just really no wrong way to do them. They're just a way to practice. Shannon and I, we do not call ourselves experts in alt text. We're learning to, a lot of access is a process, as we're learning now with a more kind of virtual world that we have to relearn how to make access possible. So it's a constant process. And I'm just so glad you're all here to kind of share with that. So this first exercise is just going to be a warm-up. It's just kind of, get those creative juices flowing, kind of starting to think a little bit about looking at an image and how we would, pull some things out of it. And it's, a little bit more about like word choice, like kind of going back to what I was talking about, one of those kinds of elements of poetry we're borrowing from. So there's going to be an image that we pulled. Mike helped me find it. It was very interesting, and I think there's going to be a lot to talk about with this image. We pulled it from, when I looked up Jersey City art, it was all murals, like pages and pages of murals that came up. I thought that was really interesting, and maybe we can have a conversation about that, like after we look at the mural. So this exercise one, it's about word choice. We're going to be pulling the different things that we see in the image out and writing them down. And so the exercise first, it'll be we'll break it up into nouns and then adjectives. So the nouns, any objects, things, just stuff, people, anything, colors that you see. I just want you to list those, like 3 to 5 words. If you feel like you're on a roll, keep going. That's totally great. And just write down the things that the objects and stuff that you're seeing. In the second half, or like this other part of the exercise, is we're just going to be pulling out the adjectives, any descriptive words, or even like the mood or how you were feeling, even how you're feeling about this process of the exercise, or how you feel about the mural, any kind of describing words. And you can either, and the same thing, like 3 to 5 words, if you're, really getting into the descriptive words, feel free to write more. And you can either keep it into 2 separate lists, or you can do one at a time, or interchange it, like whatever is most comfortable for you. So I'm going to give everybody some time to do that.
Pull up the images.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to give everybody about 10 minutes to do that, to kind of look at the image. And if you need more time, that's totally fine as well. We're not in a rush here. I think we're doing pretty good on time. So once you have all of those words written down, so then me, Holly, Shannon, and Kimberly, we're going to have a little discussion about it. We're going to just talk about the different words that they pulled out and anything that they noticed. And everybody else can feel free to write down, anything that they noticed into the chat. But we're going to just take 10 minutes now to do that. And also, the exercises are all in the chat, so that's also available, and you can take a look at those. If anybody's having any trouble accessing those exercises in the chat, let us know. We have the image now on the screen share.
The exercise in the chat.
Yes.
Okay.
So Mike's going to add those exercises right now into the chat. And if you already feel like you got it, you don't necessarily have to wait for those exercises. They're going to be there just to they're just very, very clear instructions. But if you want to go ahead and just start now by pulling out the different things I said, like one list of nouns and stuff and objects, and then one list of adjectives and describing words. You can feel free to do that too. You can just go ahead and get started with that. We're just going to post the exercise in the chat too, if you want a more point of reference.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to come back in just a couple seconds, wrap it up. If you have any other last words you want to write describing this.
Well, some people did their alt text in Facebook Live.
Oh, that's great. Mike just informed me that some people are doing their alt text or they're doing their own image description in Facebook Live.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So some people are doing their image description in Facebook Live. That's awesome. Very, very cool. All right, so I think we'll get started, and maybe what we can do is just have Holly, Summer, and Kimberly just talk about some of the things, some of the nouns that you pulled from this image, so we can kind of get an idea of what things maybe were different or the same.
You guys can start. Kim, start.
Hi everyone, my name is Kimberly. I would describe myself as a Black woman. My hair is pulled back. I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt. There's a purple background behind me and a pink lamp and like a wood headboard. Some nouns that I pulled out. I saw the cracked windshield first on the left. I'm not sure if anyone else saw it, but I definitely saw it first. I'm gonna say the planet is Mars because it's red, so I'm just gonna say it's Mars. Or you can say red planet. I saw 3 red cars, 1 black car, and an orange car. The woman is wearing a striped shirt, jeans, pants, and there's a TV with 2 antennas with a cloud on the screen.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly, and thank you for also self-describing. I appreciate that.
Welcome.
All right. So Holly said, you guys go
I can
first.
go next. I can go
Okay.
next. I just didn't want to go first.
Sure, no problem.
My name is Holly Smith. My hair is pulled back. I have a headset on that makes me look like I am piloting some kind of helicopter or an airplane. It is quite a large headset. I have no makeup on because it is quite hot.
Sure.
So I'm very natural in the face. My hair is pulled back. Behind me is quite a colorful painting, and it's very abstract looking, so you just see some splotches and drips of blue and other colors.
Great.
I couldn't really zoom in on the image, so a lot of the smaller details I couldn't really pick out very well, but
sure.
I did see the cars. Notice that they had foreign license plates on them, not like, because they were very narrow and just kind of text, maybe with the little blue EU things on the side. There was a young woman, there was a planet, and I was not able to perceive as well as Kim with the Mars, but I will accept that visual interpretation. She had skinny jeans, a striped shirt, which I guess was orange. I also couldn't see the antennae on the thing, so I just said it was a computer with the sky on it. Red sneakers, and I also did notice the broken windscreen on the car in the foreground.
Great. All right. Thank you, Holly. And Summer?
Hi, everyone. So I am an Asian Hispanic woman with long, dark hair. I'm wearing a pink dress with butterflies on it that is, I guess, sleeveless, and I'm sitting in an office with what looks on the screen to be a teal wall that has some art in it that's that's kind of imperceptible, and a big fluffy white pillow on a gray chaise behind me. So I saw a lot of those things as well. I didn't realize that the planet was Mars, but I did note definitely that red and orange was pervasive throughout the piece. The sky was full of red clouds, and the sky was red. I also noted that the woman was gigantic, and she's sitting on the cars, which I think it's interesting because it's something that, like, each of us said something that should be super apparent, quote unquote, but to hear someone else describe it, you know, I'm sure, like I heard things that Kimberly and Holly said that I thought, oh, I should have noted that as well, but I didn't. And nobody said that she's gigantic and sitting on the cars, which I think is a huge compositionally interesting thing about the mural.
Right.
Also, I noted that her clothes had a reddish tinge throughout. Even her skinny jeans, the blue jeans, were painted with a tinge of red. And then also, I noted that the mural was on a building, and around the building there are trees with no leaves. There's green metal fences and other buildings in the background that appear to be part of an urban area.
Yeah.
And I thought was really interesting about the photo was that there is a real red car that is shiny and in good condition in front of the building, almost blending in and interacting with the cars in the mural.
Oh man. Well, you know, this is really, I don't think I could have asked for better, like, different types of descriptions. It's all because for me, like, and one of the reasons why I didn't look more closely at it, and actually, like, Mike had chosen this photo, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of see how it starts to build in my mind's eye from people's different alt text or image description or the things that they pull out. And it's like, you know, each of you kind of, it started to build in my mind. And then, like, so between, like, and even like the order it went in was just incredible because it's like, you know, so Kimberly and Holly kind of gave me this really good idea of what was in the mural. And then Shannon, and then Summer was able to kind of give it more of this, like, real context in the world, which is almost like, if, you know, I'm kind of imagining and things are starting to kind of, you know, grow in my mind and getting a better idea of what's happening in the image. And well, that's one of the things I really appreciate about verbal description or any kind of description is having several different people kind of describe. One thing that I think is interesting is that this woman, and from what I could tell, she seemed to be maybe a white appearing woman. Was she blonde?
You know,
I think she had reddish hair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we were to think about, like, to describe this woman, we described her as tall, you know, we described the clothes, but I wonder, like, I mean, and I don't know, like, does she, or just maybe she look like an alien? I don't know.
It looks like a human for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if she looked happy though. It was just like she was just there.
Yeah, none of us described her mood or an opinion or interpretation of the art as far as what it meant. I kind of
that's the other column
later.
Yeah, we can talk about So let's.
We actually have like a kind of artistic, like impressionistic alt text from Facebook Live. Can you hear it?
Yeah, sure. Let's hear it. So Mike is going to read something from Facebook Live. One of the alt texts from Facebook Live.
So this one's particularly poetic. This person, Cyrus Lotus, writes, "Lonely on a pile of broken vehicles with a screen. The sky is as red as my passion. The broken windshield represents my survival." So, you know, took a more impressionistic approach, which is, you know, another way you can do alt text.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And there was, like, a little bit of a different kind of way of organizing the thoughts and words around it, which potentially could be more intriguing for sure. And thank you for that contribution. So now we can read let's dig into the adjective section, the describing words a little bit more for this image. And anybody want to start with that?
I'll start.
Sure.
So this is Summer again. I noted it was monochrome red was used throughout. It was very surreal. It had feelings of distance and removal. And it's interesting that we chose this picture for something relating to vision, because I feel like my interpretation of it was that this was a person choosing to not see certain things. Like Kimberly pointed out, there was the cloud on the TV, which I didn't even realize, but the cloud shows a very clear blue sky, and it doesn't look at all like what's actually around her, which is this red, somewhat kind of lonely feeling, chaotic sort of. I wasn't even sure she was still on Earth. It felt more like she was on Mars to me, because it felt very removed. I did put that I felt she was oblivious, because she was she's very intently focused on the TV. It's also larger than life. And I thought it was very focused and very layered. Like there's the planet that she isn't looking at, and then she's looking at the TV, but no one's like actively looking at her other than the viewer of the painting. And then there are all these cars, and then I like how the photographer of this particular photo of the mural chose to include a moment where it's interacting with the real world with the red car.
Yeah. No, thank you for that.
Mine is not as in-depth. I just wrote down some words. But
Great.
I said that I could feel the distance. I said that it was also simultaneously urban and also out of this world. Like there was a huge contrast.
Yeah.
I guess another word could be removed. But she was also focused on like, the clouds on the screen, the blue and white clouds. There was a sense of sadness and also like an I don't want to be here kind of vibe.
Okay. Kind of what Summer was saying in the initial revealing, that when you're first looking at it, you're looking at the mural elements of it, and then you realize it is a picture of a picture, right? And so that becomes very interesting. You know, the framing of, you know, the red car in the foreground, as she said, right? And just how large the wall is that the mural is on in relation to the other buildings, right?
Yes.
The image itself, the artistic image itself, is very surreal, I think, as Summer said. The predominance of warm colors, the composition is very cluttered. In the right corner with all of the cars, and the cars stacked on top of each other, versus the openness in the left hand of the composition. It's a very claustrophobic sort of picture because of that kind of, you know, clutter there. And the proportions are very strange throughout. The proportions of the cars, how large the woman is sitting there. The planet is simultaneously small and large, right?
Yes.
You're seeing it there. And also how she's just kind of in space. And so those are kind of the mood that I got from that image.
You know, I think for me, it's really interesting to hear, Holly, you're saying it kind of felt claustrophobic to you. And Kimberly was talking about distance and feeling removed. And it, you know, it's kind of, you know, something that interests me, especially when people are describing things, we're both seeing the same image, but we're getting these different feelings and different thoughts from it. And I think that something to keep in mind when thinking about alt text is there's so many different perspectives, right? And there's sometimes on a website or on somebody's social media, the way they're writing something is just that one person's perspective, and it's not necessarily going to be the most objective explanation or description of something. And I think sometimes people get a little caught up with that, like, you know, making sure they have the most objective description. And I think, Summer, you were saying something before about interpretation.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that, and I think it's kind of like part of why a lot of the alt text seems like it's like compliance, or I think there's this imposed desire to be journalistic about it and just describe what's there. Because maybe we're trying to not impose our biases. Like I realized, I'm like, I should have described that it was a white woman. And I think a lot of times we don't describe white people because white is the default. So it's like, oh, I don't have to specify unless it's a non-white person. And it's like, but we need to fight that, right? Because it's like, It's something I realized that I did that as well. I wrote it and I was like, oh, I just said a giant woman, but I should have described her more because she's not the default, right? And so you have to know, yeah. So what was I saying? Oh, the interpretation that, you know, going into it and also hearing what Holly and Kimberly had to say kind of further informed, like, I put in the chat that after I heard Kimberly talk, it made me feel like, oh, what if it's positive focus, that she's looking at the screen and it's not that she's blind to what's happening, as you said, in the bad metaphors, right? But that she is focused on a future where the sky may be that color again. So, you know, it was interesting. And that's what's so interesting about art in general, because all interpretations of it are part of it, no matter what the artist's intention is. Like, it's always interesting to go to a museum and be like, oh, this artist intended it for it to be, let's say, a comment on pollution, right? And people choosing to not address it. But another person could say, yeah, but maybe this person this is their vision and idealization and hope that they can fight pollution. Anyway, sorry.
No, I think that that also ties into, like, who gets to interpret and be valued, right? Like, you know, because there, sure, you know, we can say there's all these different types of interpretations, but lots of times, especially if we're talking in a museum space, there will be like one main interpretation that gets settled on, you know, or one main kind of, you know, even like in alt text for a long time, it was thought to be more objective and professional, not to mention the skin color of somebody. And that's, you know, an alt text or image description has existed for a very long time, like decades and decades and decades. And something that we also talk about, and we'll talk a little bit more about in the next exercise, is just like who has the authority in the room, like when describing an image, like what is that previous image description rooted in, right? Like for so long, we weren't, you know, acknowledging that, you know, there were other people that existed that were important besides white people, right? And I think, yeah, still, like, you know, we kind of just, even in the news, you don't hear, you know, a white man committed this crime, you know, a white man killed, you know, but you will hear it's a, you know, a black man did this, but not, you know, they won't necessarily describe somebody who's white as doing such and such. So I mean, that's definitely something I think is really important to kind of unpack in alt text, especially because what you're trying to do is you're trying to provide this equal textual translation of what the image is. So we're gonna definitely talk more about that in the next exercise, but I wanted to kind of you know, just check if there were any other questions or comments about this particular part of the exercise. I mean, I also think it's interesting that I don't know which part of Jersey City this mural is in. It's where?
ShopRite. It's right by ShopRite.
Oh, okay, like in downtown ShopRite?
Yes, like close to Grove Street.
Sure. I mean, you know, it just makes me think, and I would, you know, I'm curious. I mean, I would be curious to see like what other murals in Jersey City depict, you know, and I'm assuming this woman is a slim woman.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And is she attractive?
Yes, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't think it comments on her attractiveness. You can't really see her face.
Yeah.
Okay. So so I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking about other murals I've seen. But like, it'd be really interesting if we were to look at all the other murals. There's so many of them. Like, you know, we talk so much about diversity in Jersey City, and I'm just wondering, like, you know, how is that showed in our murals? And besides the murals that are honoring, you know, heroes of the civil rights movement, or you know, people like George Floyd, or you know, something that's well, those things are important to memorialize those certain events and things. But I mean, you know, what about why, you know, let's think about Afrofuturism. Like, why don't we have, like, you know, I want to see that mural, or, you know, just more of like that diversity we talk about in Jersey City reflected in the murals as well. And you know, so that was just something that I kind of thought of when I, you know, kind of got a glimpse of this mural, and I just wanted to mention it. I'm just curious, because I don't know what all the murals look like in Jersey City, but just curious. So I wanted to kind of just say that. But any other questions from the chat or anybody else?
Yeah, a few people had their own texts. No questions.
Okay, so yeah, we can see if we have some time afterwards. I think we're doing pretty good, but I'm gonna just move along to the next exercise. So the next exercise is going to be, we're gonna talk a lot more about identity in this exercise because it is something that comes up a lot in our workshop and in alt text. And I think I talked a little bit about, or even like in any kind of image description, there is sometimes this hesitancy to describe how somebody looks when we're talking about like a person's skin color. But I think even in disability, like sometimes people will question, oh, should I mention the person's wheelchair? Or, you know, should I mention this person's cane? And it's kind of like, well, that is in the image. Like what is like, you know, I think that there is this, maybe some way they're trying to be, you know, sensitive to this, you know, to describing somebody. But I, you know, in summer you use this word in a separate, you know, other Zoom webinar situation, but it's a type of erasure of, you know, deciding to not include something in a picture of somebody's identity. So I think that, you know, I also wanted to make sure we touched on this in this workshop. And so we're going to move on to exercise 3 and just talk a little bit more about identity and objectivity. You know, for this image, it's going to be pretty simple. You know, all of you have already self-described, which is great. So we kind of got an idea of how you feel, you know, to describe yourselves. We're going to have a headshot by somebody named Ali Wong or Alice Wong from the disability list. So it's just this list online of different disabled activists and artists and writers and who have their headshots up, and they also have their own self-descriptions along with them. But we're just going to show the headshot for now. And we're just going to take another like 5 minutes or so to describe this headshot. So if Mike, if you could screen share that now.
Sure.
Great.
And should I? Well, you gave the instructions.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine. I mean, you can, I mean, if it's in the chat, that's fine, but it's pretty simple.
Mike, I think it's because it's a collapsed slide.
How do I uncollapse it?
Unskip slide. You saw that was the second option. There we go.
Thank you, Summer.
I just did tech for a huge event, so I'm like,
oh. Oh, we're all learning. I mean, oh my goodness, how much have I learned from this festival? All right, we're going to come back together in just a little bit and give you a couple more seconds to wrap up any descriptions or let me know if you need more time.
It's so interesting to quantify all of the information we gather when we look at something and put that out. And I'm realizing that I wrote a whole bunch of stuff that I perceived very quickly. And like I had to look further, think more to start going into the description. But I'm realizing that one way or another, I do intake this information very quickly. And I don't realize how much information, you don't realize how much you really perceive about something until you write it down.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we're definitely, we're, in an ocular centric, society. We're always like thinking about vision, 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 vision. But yeah, when we take a minute to write it all down, there's there's definitely a different thought process that happens. Do you want to start with what you wrote, or does anybody else want to start?
I can, sure.
Great.
So I try to go in. All right.
Yes.
An East Asian woman with light skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. Her hair appears to be pulled back or cropped very short, with a section near her hairline appearing to have been shaved. She seems to be anywhere from 30 to 40 years old. We're Asian. You can never tell with us. She is mystery years old. And I don't know how to say this, so I'm very eager to hear feedback, but she's average weight. But I don't like how that is, that's a fat phobic way to describe somebody who, weighs a certain expected weight for her body frame. So I need help on that. She has bright red lipstick, but not much else makeup on, and no jewelry. She has a medical device on her nose that wraps around her face, made of clear and white plastic parts, extending down to a gray tube that likely helps her to breathe. I didn't know what that was called. This is a respirator, but I was like, it's probably helpful for somebody who doesn't know what that is either for me to actually describe it. Sure. She has a black scarf with a graphic design of little white swords throughout around her neck. She has on a black winter jacket, likely made with down feathers. She is standing in front of an abstract mural that has shapes in a vibrant purple and red, electric yellow outlines, all on a neon green background. She smiles wryly. I realized it took me so long to get to the vibe of what was going on, like how she even feels. Sure. The photograph appears to be a headshot taken by a professional photographer, right? High resolution, very well composed, outdoors in the daytime. And I realized it took me a long time to get to that too, which is probably one of the first things my mind is thinking, like, it's outside, it's daytime, there's the sun.
Right.
And that's as far as I got, but pictures really are worth 1,000 words, I guess. Wow.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's going to be interesting because we have what she described, and we'll read that later. And I think one thing I want to say to, how you kind of started with one thing and you feel like it might have taken you a while to get to one thing. It's honestly, image description and alt text, it does take practice. Like, for me, I dictate everything. So kind of being able to think, how I want to structure things, like, and I think everybody kind of gets into their own groove of it, but it does take practice because you start to think about, oh, how do I want to lay out this description? Like, what do I want to start with the setting? And I mean, some people will start with more like a general kind of thing and then kind of whittle it down into the more of the details. But I think that it really does take practice. And that's a super extensive description because the one, that I read, there's like definitely some things that you went into more detail of, which I appreciate. So let's, for now, we'll go on to the next description. Who wants to volunteer?
I'll go, Kim, whoever.
Yeah.
I'll go. Can you hear me?
Sure, yeah.
It was more objective.
Kimberly, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It was more objective. So I said that this is a headshot. It has a multicolored background with mainly green and strokes of yellow, red on the right and purple on the left. There's an Asian American woman. Actually, I don't even know if she's American now I think about it. Oh no. Okay. See?
No problem.
Difficult. In the middle with jet black hair and a semi-shaved side. She's wearing vibrant red lipstick, a black coat, black scarf with white daggers. I do like that Summer said it was swords. I just wasn't
Can you
sure.
ask her to speak up again?
Can you just speak up again, Kimberly? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, sure. She's smiling.
There you go.
I don't know how to say this in like a non-ableist way.
Don't worry. Listen, we're all learning.
Okay. She's wearing or using a white and gray breathing tube, but
Yes.
I don't even know if it's a breathing tube or the proper term, so I'm not certain. And
Yeah.
it is outside. That's all I did.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly.
You're welcome. It's not poetic, but
No, it's fine. You know what? Honestly, we're just practicing, you know?
thank you.
We're getting the hang of it. You know, I'm always practicing too. And Holly.
Yes. So it's interesting to figure out, just to like look at the image yourself and then to try to prioritize how you reveal the information,
Sure.
what you do. And I forgot to do the hair. Like, right, I noticed her undercut. I thought, I was like, oh, her undercut is cool. And then like, I guess in the whatever. So there were things that I noticed visually that didn't get into the thing. Okay, so an East Asian woman is shown from the shoulders up in a brightly lit close-up of her face centered in the image. She is smiling with her eyebrows slightly raised, wearing dark pink lipstick, and wears a white plastic respirator strapped around her head with a gray tube coming down from her nose. She wears a black quilted jacket and a black scarf with what appears to be a print of white knives. Behind is the colorful background of green abstract graffiti shapes traced in yellow on a red ground.
Great. I mean, all of these helped me really understand the image better. And I think I'm just going to say again how much I appreciate having multiple descriptions of something, because you know, for somebody who's blind or living with low vision, having one description is helpful, but having 3 or 4 or 5 can be it can almost be a creative process in and of itself and can add to the pleasure of experiencing an image. So I wanted to make sure I said that because I feel like I have such a more in-depth idea of what the image is. And I also want to just speak a little bit about Alice Wong. She's this incredible, important disability activist. She has started this kind of movement, Access is Love, along with 2 other Asian American disability activists. And she's recently also published an edited volume, Disability Visibility Project. It's actually this compilation of her work online on a Facebook page, just all of these different writings and resources. And so she recently put that out, and it's definitely something I would highly recommend. And so she's doing a lot of really important work right now. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And Mike, could you read her description that she had for herself?
Sure. Her self-description reads, an Asian American woman wearing a mask over her nose attached to a tube connected to a BiPAP machine. She has medium-length black hair and is wearing red lipstick. She's wearing a black scarf and jacket, and behind her is a wall with brightly colored street art.
You know, I think that Holly's description was very close. Like, you know, like I think except for maybe you said pinkish lip.
Yeah,
or dark.
I was really looking. It's like, what color is this?
Yeah. What shade is this?
What shade?
But yeah, and I think you know, I've been in workshops before where people didn't mention the mask, which I think is interesting. And not that I'm not, this isn't a game of gotcha, but I wanted to, I wanted to kind of explore how do we describe these different things, and how do we describe somebody who is using a tube, and thinking about the best ways to do that. And I think, sometimes when we're describing an image of a person, even sometimes I'll say seeming to be, or seeming to use a tube, or seeming to use, some type of breathing device. And that even can be like, sometimes you might want to further describe possibly like somebody's gender, like somebody who seems to be female appearing or female identifying. But one of the most important things that I try to do is to always ask people how they want to be described. I did a lot of, and I'm trying to do more, posts of people who've participated, and I wanted to make sure I had their descriptions, how they want to be described. I think that's like, number one thing when we're thinking about describing people. If you're posting a picture of someone else, just, asking them, like, how do you want to be described? Like, what makes you feel most comfortable? And I mean, that's not necessarily a silver bullet, because as we talked a little bit before, sometimes white people don't feel like they have to describe that they're white. And so you might get a description from somebody who's white, not describing that they're white. And that definitely leaves out a lot of their appearance. And, if you're going to be posting a headshot or an image of somebody, people ask, should I, mention their skin color? And I think that is part of a person's appearance. And we're really trying to translate that image into text. So, firstly, I always try to ask people first, like, how would they describe themselves? And then if I, maybe need to do some editing, like, hey, let's talk a little bit about, skin color. Like, is that something you feel comfortable talking about? Like, just so people have a better idea of what you look like. And that's kind of been my approach. Because we can sometimes get into like interpretation when we're describing images, but we're really trying to just, as much as possible, provide access and an equal experience to the image. And and for me, I thought it was interesting, like that I think Summer and Holly, you mentioned that she was East Asian. And, I wouldn't have picked that up. And I think it's also interesting that, she identified as an Asian American. So there's these different kinds of maybe nuances that people might notice, or maybe she didn't feel it was necessary to mention. But I think that sometimes, talking about identity can be a little bit more to unpack and to talk about. And I want to open it up now a little bit more to you all. I feel like I've been talking a little bit. But any other like thoughts on this? Like anything else that felt like revealed or kind of made sense?
I think it's worth bringing in, maybe I can read it too. There's a comment in the chat.
Oh, please do.
From Bill Ruth.
Yes.
And he asks, do you find yourself researching to identify something accurately, like the tubing, or simply indicating that you aren't certain?
So that's a great question. And I think I would either, like for something like that, honestly, if I were describing this image, now that I have a better idea, I would probably keep it like, I would say something like a white mask, that's attached to the face, like either with like, some type of elastic, and I would say a tube. And I wouldn't go into finding out exactly what kind of tube that is and what the exact proper terminology for that exact type of tube is. I would more or less be describing what the visual content is. That's just for me, and I think that might be for a lot of people who are doing alt text. But I don't think that researching and let's say finding out exactly what kind of tube that is at all I don't know, looked down upon, or I think that it's we're just trying to get people to describe, what's going on in these images.
I had a question about, so
Yes.
I started, in preparation for this, I actually started going through the InfoColor website and looking at what I could describe. And so we also, so I realized that a lot of our headings were graphics, and I was like, oh, I gotta change it so that it says what the heading is, right? So like, about us or whatever, because I realized that may not be, like the file name would be something like about us, ifc.jpg, and I'm like, that's, it's perceptible, but it's not the best.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started going through our pictures, and a lot of them are cast pictures. And there's like 12 or 13 people in it. There's a lot going on. And I just put a diverse group of women smiling. And I'm like, is that okay? Like, I just it's a picture of 35 people.
Yes.
Like, do I have to count how many?
Summer, get back right now, and I want you to start describing. Well, I would say one thing. And you said the word diverse. Now, I'm going to ask, and this is not, again, just to get us thinking about it. When I think diverse, I think people with canes, wheelchairs, walkers, people who have tubes, So, I would say, then what does diverse mean, right?
Yeah.
So
for us, the most obvious thing is ethnic diversity, but I also, when I curate our shows, I try to have a variety of body types, ages, just diversity in every category. So, and then we also have people who are disabled. We also have people who are queer. So,
right.
I could mention all of those aspects.
No, I know. It's kind of like, how do we find the wording around it? Like to really, and honestly, my question is more like, is this constant conversation that's happening now, or it's something that disabled people have constantly been asking for? Is like, include us in diversity. We're part of diversity, right? And so, I think that, that's tough, because you don't want to say a diverse group of able-bodied people, because people, that might not be the case. But honestly, I think just like the shorthand for now, that makes sense. Like just a multitude of diverse women in the shot. That obviously, that makes more sense. And then maybe if there are other pictures or other ways to kind of denote more what that means throughout the website, to kind of give people using a screen reader a better idea of what does that mean. Maybe that's a way. And I'm just going to go back and say again, access is a process. Like we're, trying to figure out these best ways to like let people know what's going on in these images. And, Summer, you mentioned before also, how would you describe like somebody's weight?
Yeah.
And, that's definitely, and honestly, that is for all of the work I've been doing in image description and in this work, that hasn't necessarily come up as much. But I would definitely say, listen to what people tell you if somebody is using certain terminology for themselves. But, do you also want, I can't imagine like, having this conversation, like, how would you describe your weight? That can be, I think a conversation that we need to think more about, for sure. Like, I really do think we need to think more about, because I don't actually, I don't usually mention it in my description. But even age too, yeah. I think Summer, you mentioned age, and how do we, because that is, potentially a big part of how we think of somebody and describe someone.
Yeah, and I think it's a representation thing too, the more I think about it, because I think, when you're writing this down, like people who might say, oh, I don't want to include their skin color, it's kind of this, this is not quite the word, but the word that came to me was gatekeeping, in the sense of like maybe there's good intention, like, oh, but I want to be fair, or protect these people from people's racial biases, but it's like that you're still assuming that the default person is white.
Exactly.
That the audience is all white, and that they, you know, I don't want them to be like, oh, the person in the photo is East Asian and have these ideas about East Asians in their heads. But it's like, if they were fully sighted people, they would have that reaction, you know. And then what about the East Asian people in the audience? Isn't it important for them to know that this photo of this activist is, you know, a person, and even like the age thing, right? So if it was a very young person, that might be empowering for a very young person to say like, wow, this person is doing this and they're my age.
Right.
Or if this was a person who is much older, and say like, wow, this person is active at like 80 years old. I can do that too. And there's always an assumption that the people looking at something are not like the person in the photo, and that's not always true. Like for me, it's certainly inspiring when someone is more like me in some way, or even when they're not like me, it's cool to be like, wow, look at this person of this ethnic group or age group or ability or disability is doing this. It's, you know, it's good to know that that's happening. That person's out there. It's part of who they are.
That's why people post pictures.
Exactly.
Like, that's the whole reason why we post pictures, right? Like, we do it so people can relate. And then when we say, oh, in order to not turn people away or turn people off or offend people, we're not going to mention the skin color. Like, I think instead what it's doing is it, by not mentioning, you know, more about the person's identity, you may be potentially creating more distance. You know, instead of bringing people closer, you might be keeping some kind of distance. And so I think, like, yeah, if you have a headshot of somebody on your website, think about, you know, it kind of goes back to those other questions, like the, what was it, like I think it was like the wiki questions, like, why is this image here? You know, like, why do you have this content here? So I think that's always a good question to have in the back of your head. Like, when you're thinking about describing, and you can think about, why is this image here? What am I trying to do with this image? So, you know, that can help sometimes answer like how you write your alt text, or like that can help guide why you might be writing that alt text. For sure. Let me just check this. Yeah, no problem. This is 2:40. Okay, so we're doing good on time. I'm probably gonna just start winding it down just a little bit. I want to also just make sure, see if there's any questions in the chat about any of this, or if anybody has any other like comments about this part of the workshop. Do you see anything, Mike?
No, we're all caught up.
Great. So I'm going to just take some time to talk about some of the resources before we go that people can take a look at. I mentioned before, there's the hashtag Access is Love, which was started by Alice Wong and 2 other people who are Asian American. And it's really talking more about access that is, you know, about the relationships and trust between people, as opposed to something that's government mandated. And I think we can all really benefit from that in Jersey City, just thinking about it that way. In a previous workshop talking about disability justice, you know, I think when we think about the images of disabled people, a lot of times we think of these, you know, white cisgendered straight men who've lost the use of their legs, or they end up with prosthetics and they end up running across the country and doing something really inspiring. But, you know, the reality is most people who are disabled are people who are people of color. It affects people of color disproportionately. It affects poorer people as well. And so, you know, I think that especially in Jersey City, we really need to seriously start thinking about that. Thinking about access for people, Black people, Indigenous people, other people of color, LGBTQ people. I think that we are such a diverse city, but we kind of rest on those laurels to a certain degree, and we're not always actively making sure that those people have a voice and have space in the art community. So I want to make sure when when I'm talking about disability, I'm also thinking about the intersections with other marginalized people. There is also Sins Invalid, which is this amazing group on the West Coast. It's made up of Black people, Indigenous people of color, queer, and they have done a lot of amazing performances, and trans people, just regarding disability and disability, sensuality, sexuality. They do a lot of work around activism. There's also Georgina Klieg is a great resource. She's an amazing scholar, a really funny woman. I would, check out any writing or articles online that she has going on. You can check out my website. I have a bunch of stuff up there. Jersey City Local, working on as much as I can, Jersey Local, Jersey City Access. My website is just my name, bojanakokliat.com. And we have one more event today for the Jersey City JCADA30 Festival. I'm so excited. We're going to have a Crip Camp watch party tonight. And we're very lucky. Art House is hosting that. And really, really wonderful that they're doing that. That's going to be starting at 6:30. If you want more information, you can also just go to Art House's website or their Facebook page, and there's more information there on how you can tune in. We're going to have a watch party of Crip Camp. If you haven't seen it, and if you can't make it tonight, please, if you do one thing today or the rest of this month to honor the signing of the ADA, please watch this movie. It's fun. It's just one of those epic movies about a movement. It starts in the 70s in Woodstock at this camp where disabled people had gone, and it kind of shows this growing and nurturing of this disability movement, and kind of shows how we got to where we are today, but also talks about the work that still needs to be done. After the movie, we're going to have a panel discussion, which I think is going to be great. We have some other local disabled people who work in the county, just to kind of open up some more conversation about the movie, but also about what we want to see happen in Jersey City. And that's partly why I wanted to start this festival, to get that conversation going, because it's not happening, and it's not happening within our government. It's it's not happening as much as I think it could be in the arts. And I always feel like the arts can change the world. Art can change the world, and that's why I'm working on access in the arts and wanting to make sure everybody can be included as much as possible. I think those are all of the resources. I think you might have posted some in I
posted most of them in the chat.
Awesome, thank you so much. And again, so we have a little bit of extra time. If anybody has anything else they want to talk about that's close to them or important to them kind of regarding this, or any other thoughts or anything else.
Can we hear some of the alt text poetry that Mike said was on the Facebook
Yes, absolutely. That would be great.
Oh, sure. Okay, so this might be a haiku. I'm not sure. This is from
who's a poet? Who can tell us?
This is from Bill Rood. He writes, "Images are dense. All text makes sense. Worth 1,000 words, but maybe keep it to 10."
That's great. Oh man, I love it. All right, well, I got to make that a t-shirt. That's happening, Bill. All right, and do we have any other alt text haikus or other poems that people wrote?
There is, yeah, that was the most notable thing. Just had a couple people describe Ali Wong.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Great. No, thanks for
you missed one, Mike.
Did I?
Oh,
yes.
He's
I think
fired.
you're from Crystal.
You're fired from the team.
Yes, Crystal Davis writes, "Woman underneath orange sky, seated alone upon junkyard cars, Mars as her moon, reminiscing cloudy blue skies on a small TV screen."
Oh, great.
And I give her a like.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah, Crystal.
Yes, yes.
There's other ones too. Oh no, we had that one, the brighter past. Yeah. Okay.
You should have an alt text poetry slam. It's like writing prompts. Like you'd have the picture and have people write about it.
All right, next event, and that is what's happening.
What's a picture prompt? Holly, you need to tell us.
You want some picture prompts? Are there any crowdsourced kind of alt text projects going on?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because I should be mentioning this. So me and Shannon, we have put together a website, an alt text as poetry website, and there's a section on there. It's kind of like an alt text study club blog. So it's we're compiling all of these found alt texts that we appreciated or that we thought might be useful or beneficial. This, also, maybe this is important to mention, Shannon and I have published a workbook on alt text. That's going to be coming out later this summer. But also the website, it's alttexaspoetry. It might be .net. I'm not sure. It's not completed yet, but once it is, I'll be posting it. But it has all of this information about alt text as poetry and other resources that can be used. But the thing is with alt text, so much of what's out there about alt text is really, there isn't, like I was talking about before, like a real collective toolkit. It's kind of more about be very objective, like write this as if you're a docent at a museum describing the thing you see. And which is fine. Like, I mean, there's a place for like more objective types of alt text. Maybe the Smithsonian might be a good, they do a lot of good work in that area. The Met's been doing some work, but it's all kind of, from what I've seen, or you know what, WebAIM. So it's Web Access in Mind. That's a good, really good site because that's really clear, concrete type of stuff that you can check out. But if we're, talking specifically about like an alt text as poetry kind of thing, it's definitely something more Shannon and I have been working. Oh, great. Oh, thank you. So, and Mike posted the alt text as poetry site in the chat if anybody wants that. And we're going to save the chat. So that'll be, we'll have all these resources if anybody wants them for a later time. We also recorded this, so it'll also be an additional resource on alt text and things a little bit more specific to Jersey City. I love that we had time to kind of read some people's examples of alt text. That's great. That's not something we usually get to do in these workshops, but I'm really glad we got a chance to do that. That made it extra fun for me in doing this workshop. Anybody else? I know I have a tendency to go on and talk for a little bit, but any other questions or comments?
I'm not huge on Instagram. I'm old,
Yeah, no problem.
But it just seems like, like when we talk about, what is the purpose of the image, that so many of the images on Instagram are really about identity, right? And influencers, different body types, showing different standards of beauty. It just kind of seems like such a missed opportunity, even when people sign up for these platforms, that they don't tell you how to do alt text, because it just seems so natural to have these alt texts. And Kim is our young person here.
Yes, I use alt text on my pictures. I don't know how well I am. Bojana can let me know.
No, and I think I think in your images you're definitely conveying the information in the photo, and that's I want to make sure, like, I don't want the goal is to have these images described. I don't want that to get sidelined with, you have to do it really creatively, like a poet. But I think I just wanted to introduce some ways of thinking, like around kind of like, intentional word use. But I do think that, you do provide, access access to the images that you post, which I think is really important. So yeah, no, it's great.
But Kim, is that like a discussion among young people when they use social media?
No, because I had to, and please let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough. I had to like do a mini tutorial on my Insta story yesterday because I was just like, okay, I'm gonna be on this panel, come join me. And people are like, well, what is alt text? And I was like, oh, okay, let's just start from the beginning. And like I screen recorded my like how I do it. Like you can just go to edit on the left. You can tag people, which a lot of people tag a lot of people, but they forget about the right side where it just says edit alt text. And then you can click on it and write your description.
Yep.
And so who was it in the disability justice chat? There was a girl who was talking about like why if your page is public and my page is public, it should automatically, you should be doing it because you don't know who's going to come across your images.
Right.
But if it's private, like you can choose unless you know that someone who follows you is living with low vision or is blind. And so like once I learned about it, I learned about it before I met Bojana, but I was just like, why would I not do it? It's just, that's just how I feel about it. So yeah, those 100 people who follow me now, they know, but I don't think the rest of the people who use Instagram know.
Yeah, you're right. And I wish it was something that was more kind of prevalent on Instagram or somehow a little bit more featured, because even like when you go into the features of when you're posting on Instagram, it's the very last thing and it says advanced settings. So who's going to go to advanced settings if you're just posting, if it could be a little bit easier, maybe, not hidden and buried in advanced settings. You got to go to advanced settings. And once you're in advanced settings, then it's accessibility. And then you go under accessibility to alt text, which I'm glad it's there. But I think so often access is buried. It's like the little bitty access statement somewhere at the bottom or at the very end of a website, or, it's so often it's kind of pushed to the side or, some type of afterthought. But it's not that hard. And actually alt text was created as a mode of like search engine optimization. So, I mean, it does behoove people to use alt text because then, more people, when that alt text is, coded in there, if somebody's looking, if you're coding in, I'm wearing if you're a vintage clothes store and you're like vintage Chanel bag in, you code that into the alt text, when people search for that brings it up. It's something that people will see more likely. So there are like additional benefits, to using alt text besides, very importantly, making things more accessible, for people with low vision. So there's, like a lot of things with access or accommodations, there's, many other benefits to making things accessible. I think we just need to start thinking about it a little bit more. And I think we are in a time where people are thinking more about disability as an identity and not a charity group or a medicalized group, but more as an identity with common goals and desires and a culture.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of influencers don't even realize that is there.
Yeah, no, if there were some, I think I would know, but I don't really know anybody who's, even like museums aren't all doing it. Like I was mentioning, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago and the Met are doing it, fairly consistently, but not even the Met consistently. So when we don't even have those institutions doing it, it's hard, we don't have somebody really modeling best behavior, but we can do that in Jersey City. You know what I mean? We can start to model that. And, there's organizations who say we can't work on access. I understand that, but I'm hoping to work more closely to say, hey, well, let's model what we want. Let's start with alt text. It's free and it doesn't take a long time. So.
Holly, does Jersey City still require volunteer hours for high school students for graduation? Because
yep, 50 hours.
Because I think that would be a great potential opportunity for a lot of local organizations, because also it's like, you know, you just have this young person go into your Instagram and literally just go in and describe what's going on, and it's a fairly simple but vital task.
Yes, that's amazing. I love that idea. I mean, I will be talking to Holly later. So we have maybe just like a little less than 5 minutes. I want to honor the time of the sign language interpreters and then not go over. I want to thank them for being here. Thank Stephanie and Kathleen for interpreting today and making that access possible. Thank you so much, Holly, Summer, and Kimberly, for being here and sharing your thoughts and comments and your knowledge and your experiences with the workshop today. I was so looking forward to this. It was so great to share this workshop with everybody. And thank you everybody on Facebook Live and in the comments who contributed. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you can always email me too, or contact me through Facebook or any other way. I'm absolutely more than happy to answer questions. And, you know, hopefully this will be a generative conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Let's see if we need